More than 1,000 ICT experts and decision makers attended the Technology Innovation Conference hosted by the Gauteng Provincial Government. On the second day of the conference, the panel discussion on the topic of planning the future innovation ecosystem was moderated for CNBC Africa by Godfrey Mutizwa.
I am hoping that at the end of our discussion, we would have laid out what needs to be done for us to be able to catch up. I've been told that if I do not do this right, I'll not get my lunch. I intend to get my lunch, so I'm going to work these ladies and gentlemen here very hard indeed. Let me introduce them. On my left, immediately, we have Professor Y.C. Lung. She is a Deputy Head of Computer Science and Engineering at the University of Johannesburg. Welcome, ma'am. And next to her is Sanjeev Ori. He is CEO Business Value at First National Bank. Welcome, Sanjeev. Next, I have Anita Ferreira, Senior Executive Public Sector at TransUnion. Welcome, Anita. And Teddy Dakar is the Group CEO of ANSYS Group. And last but not least, I have Tommy Makode. He's Deputy Director General, Institutional Planning and Support at the Department of Science and Technology. Tommy, welcome. First of all, I want to start by getting a proper understanding and a layout of the kind of architecture that we need to build in order to be able to create this innovative innovation ecosystem. Can I begin with you, Professor? And then we move down the line and get everybody's opening thoughts.
Thank you. Well, I'm only going to really speak from an education perspective and what I've experienced. What we've noticed is that we do need to come up with curriculum to educate our population. Specifically, right now, we've got people who need to up their skills, and the only way we can do it is if we can go ahead with creating this curriculum. Now, at the moment, our department actually creates short learning programs that address some of the concerns that the government have outlined. For example, the need to upskill cybersecurity awareness. And so as a response to that, we have these programs out, and we have people from industry sending their employees to come and take this module. And through that, we can see that we are addressing some of the human capital aspect of that architecture. But I know that my colleagues here, my fellow panelists, can address the other aspects.
It does sound like you're beginning, though.
Yes.
You are?
Yes.
Okay. Sanjeev?
I think that cities across the world pretty much experience the same types of problems. But I think in South Africa, it's amplified along the lines of unemployment, probably service delivery to the citizens and to our mutual customers, and then probably also immigration. And I think if you're looking to set up this ecosystem, there's an acknowledgement that the key components of the ecosystem are in place already. They're there. It's more around making sure that the respective shareholders and the co-collaborators coalesce on the right types of topics. I think the types of problems that we're facing need exponential types of solutions as well, and unemployment is probably one of the biggest ones. If you're going to set up an ecosystem, it needs to be around how do you solve for unemployment. The numbers that South Africa experiences are probably the worst in the world or the highest in the world. Firstly, you have something like 9.5 million unemployed people who are due or should be employed. And of that, which is probably most telling and most frightening, around 6 million of those are individuals less than the age of 34. So I suppose it's almost an explosion around youth unemployment. So I think if you're looking for the components of the ecosystem, they're there firstly. Secondly, it's around how do you make sure that all of the parties see the business case value in each of these components of the ecosystem. Everybody needs to coalesce around it firstly, and then secondly, there needs to be almost the will to want to solve for it. So FNB is fairly fortunate in the sense that we've partnered with quite a number of public sector entities. We've done a few programs with Gauteng Provincial Government around incubation and acceleration, together together with some of the components that we're building for, I suppose, delivery of app-based solutions. And then we've also partnered with the Companies and Intellectual Properties Commission. And in all of those partnerships, what we found is that there has to be a willingness to want to solve for the problem. So in these instances, it's around unemployment, it's around citizen delivery, it's around almost making available the components available to companies out there to want to have to solve for it. And I'd like to use the example of probably, I suppose, fintech and the rise of fintech and how they've been able to disrupt. Mm-hmm. The reason they've been able to disrupt is because you have large, almost multinational companies or incumbents that are probably too unfocused on the problems at hand. And I think that sort of approach, this open architecture, this open innovation approach to allow these problems to be solved by multi-parties and probably some of the smaller companies and each of the different parties of the ecosystem.
Absolutely, thank you. Anita, if I can move to you, opening thoughts in terms of what we need to build up this system.
I would just also like to start to say that many of you maybe know me from my previous role. As Godfrey indicated, I recently joined TransUnion, but in my previous role, I will respond and contribute to this panel where I head up the IT audit for the Auditor General of 15 years, where we provide insights and root causes of the real challenges that government is facing by doing plus minus 1,000 IT audits in 1 year. So for me, when we talk about the ecosystem and architecture, I think an important role is first to get the basics right. And if we look at the basics and we focus on people, processes, and technology, one of the key areas that we need to get the basics right first is our operating integrity. That is what we do on our day-to-day basis. And I'm referring to your management reports from an audit point of view, is that, and I'm talking about government in general, and not specific to Gauteng province, is that we struggle still with basic IT controls. And when I talk about basic, and I will just, if you allow me, one or two that I mention, is that we struggle to have password controls in place for our systems and our applications. We don't have control over changes. We don't have control over our user bases. And where it comes into the ecosystem, although we think it's basics, this is where data quality starts. And in an ecosystem, we need to have good quality of data. And for me, then secondly, also with the ecosystem, is where we need to stop working in silos. Within a department, between departments, but also between public sector and private. For me, the ecosystem is very important. Like I say, we have to work together to get a better government and ultimately to have impact on the citizens. For me, secondly, is then the ecosystem is to share data. We have to put data in an open platform, and I want to refer to the session yesterday on cloud with the CEO of CITO. That was very impressive of the innovation that they're starting there to have an open platform with data available for an ecosystem to start off. The other part is also for ecosystem is that we need to do analysis of the data that we have available to us in government. But most important, all of us needs to constantly make a decision that we want to be part of an ecosystem. We have to start think differently when we do our business and when we think about data. Because I don't think that we as government understand the power that we have with the data in our possession. And we must start unlocking those potentials to improve the lives of the citizens of South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. Teddy, I want you to sketch for me, if you will, your understanding of what needs to be done to build this ecosystem.
I'd like to go back and start where MEC started from, Chrissy, that is, when she defined the ecosystem. The difference between the innovation ecosystem and the bio ecosystem is that the bio one deals with energy dynamics, how you move along the food chain, and you've got equilibrium if the food chain is well balanced. You are a prey, you get eaten, you die, you feed the plant, somebody eats the plant, so that bio ecosystem works. When you're dealing with the issue of innovation, that ecosystem has got different components that you have to work with. On the one side, you have got the research institutions, for example, the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, R&D in companies, the academics, my colleague here, Grace, all on the side of the knowledge economy. That's one side of the ecosystem. On the other side of the ecosystem, you have the commercial side, because all the knowledge that is built and all the innovations that you start with have to convert into products and services that people can consume, and in the process, you create jobs, you create wealth, and you do all these things. We're having this conversation within the context of Industry Version 4. Therefore, the challenge that we have as South Africa and many African countries, or perhaps even countries within emerging economies, is how do we find a way in which we can translate more efficiently the knowledge that is being built, the innovations that we're building within the knowledge side of the economy, to bring equilibrium to what happens on the commercial side. Now, that's easier said to see it from an ecosystem point of view. There's lots of innovation that takes place within the country at the moment, but it hardly finds expression on the commercial side and create jobs, because this translation process within the members that are sitting in this ecosystem, there is no coherence and there is no coordination. Here's a good example. If you look at our current Industrial Policy Action Plan, IPIP2, and its iterations, you read through that document, you'll be lucky to find, even in the way it is contextualized, whether they're even thinking of the impact of Industry Version 4. Zero. Now, that's one policy that is talking about how we can grow this economy and how we can fix, our industry. But there's no mention of what is happening on Industry Version 4. Now, we do understand that the whole thing about Industry Version 4 is that how we produce, how we consume is constantly changing. And therefore, that requires us to think differently. Many countries at the moment have started having plans around this. China has what they call Made in China 2025. The EU have got their own program. The US have their own program. Germany has got its own Industry Version 4 program. All these programs are designed to look at how are we going to meet the new ways in which we are going to produce goods and services, and how are we going to make sure we create access, especially for countries such as ours with high employment levels, the 9 million people that my colleague Sanjeev discussed. How do we use this innovation to bring people that are on the fringes of the economy to come in? If we don't do that, we know that Industry Version 4 is going to disrupt not just businesses and industries, but it's also going to disrupt countries.
Sure.
Because where things are built, where things are made, it's where jobs are going to be created, not here.
It sounds to me like that question should be thrown to the men next to you, because from a government perspective, I suppose we have to acknowledge the fact that we are here, we're discussing it, and we're saying, what can we do about it? But from a government perspective, Tommy, where do you see the role of government?
Well, thank you very much, Godfrey, and thanks for the invite. I think while government has an important role to play in terms of what you are referring to as an innovation system, and I align myself, that's the beauty of being the last speaker, I align myself with inputs that have been made by the colleagues. What is critical is that business and civil society are critical partners in any innovation system. And for partnerships to function well, I agree with what Teddy has just raised. All organs of state have to pursue the same agenda. And their policies and programs should be coordinated in order to achieve the synergy that is referring to. I think this conference in Gauteng comes at quite an important time for us as the Department of Science and Technology. Firstly, we had this document that was adopted by Cabinet known as the 10-year innovation plan.
If you can open it.
And this year in particular, 2018, marks 10 years since we've had this document, which was adopted by Cabinet, which was supposed to drive our innovation policy. And in this document, there were 5 grand challenges that were identified. Amongst them, of course, it was, of course, the energy security, what we needed to do and be innovative with regards to that. And there's some important elements that we've started to, or that have been implemented with regards to that. DDG Mboneni is here, he can speak about the work that we're doing with MPLETs with regards to utilizing hydrogen fuel cells for forklifts, for example. The second area was around space science, for example. In this document, we were tasked, there was a task that was given to us that in the next 10 years, at least, we should have built a satellite and launched it. We've done that. We were able to launch Sumbandira, but that was a demonstrator. And I think they're building blocks, going back to the question that you posed earlier on, they're building blocks in terms of what we need to do to get to this ecosystem. But the critical thing that we need, Godfrey, is to have institutions to support this ecosystem. And as the DST, we've set up a whole lot of new institutions to support the innovation in particular. We've set up the South African National Space Agency, we've set up the Technology Innovation Agency, we've set up NIPMO as agencies that are supposed to assist us in supporting this ecosystem. But critical is that this year in particular, we've had almost 20 years since government has had a white paper on science, technology. And this year in particular, we're reviewing that document to come up with a new document that speaks to these new global trends. On the program, I saw there were people that spoke about these global trends. How do we take advantage of opportunities that Teddy spoke about with regards to Industry 4? How do we respond to some of these things? Thank you.
I want to stay with you because I want to ask you the question. So you are putting in these efforts, and I think Sanjeev and I think Teddy mentioned the fact that there's a lot of innovation that is already taking place, but it seems unstructured, uncoordinated. Do we need to build a superstructure that unites all these efforts, and we begin to see perhaps the fruits of a national attempt to build this ecosystem? I want to start with you, and I'll get the thoughts of the others.
Well, thank you very much again, Godfrey. So one of the things that we're proposing in this new white paper on science, technology, and innovation is that at the highest level, we should have an interministerial committee that, amongst others, looks at issues of funding. Secondly, agenda prioritization. And the third area is how do we coordinate some of the activities that we're intending to achieve as a country. But critical is also to ensure that we optimize the role that innovation can play in solving some of our societal problems, whether it's health challenges, water challenges, whether it's areas around sanitation and so on and so forth. How do we coordinate all those efforts? So we're saying at a national level, let's have an interministerial committee, and I'm not saying this because I'm from Department of Science and Technology, which will be chaired by the Minister of Science and Technology to coordinate these efforts that you are referring to. But the second area that we're proposing is that currently, there's a structure that advises government on innovation. I don't know how many people know about it. It's called the National Advisory Council on Innovation, which is chaired by Professor Dilare at the University.
Actually, let's put out the question to the audience. How many people know about this innovation center, right?
So it's supposed to advise the minister and cabinet. Of course, whatever advice goes to cabinet has to come through the minister around innovation. And what we're proposing in the new a white paper is that NACI, as it's known in short, should become the stakeholder forum that's able to coordinate business, that's able to coordinate civil society, that's able to coordinate academia and government with regards to innovation. And the third area is that, of course, we're proposing that there should be sectoral plans. For example, government business should be developing its sectoral plans with regards to innovation. And the last one is that we're saying that in the white paper that provinces and local government should support innovation. There should be a certain amount of money that's set aside to support innovation, whether it's at a local government level and at a provincial level. Thanks.
Easier said than done, I think. But Teddy, the accusation against the private sector is that you guys, in your pursuit of profit, you do forget to put aside money for innovation, as well as, in particular, research and development. I think the figures show that the government actually in South Africa spends more on research and development than the private sector. Can we do more? And I want your thoughts as well on perhaps the creation of this supranational body that sort of gets everybody's thoughts around innovation and makes the country relevant?
There's no doubt in my mind that we do need a superstructure. Government has a role in orchestrating this ecosystem. But also, let's not forget that any ecosystem has got sub-ecosystems within it.
Yes, of course.
So at various levels, we need to identify what kind of technologies or innovation that we want to put money behind and drive those as a sub-ecosystem. For instance, there's a sub-ecosystem already that we have now for the motor industry, the automotive industry. The question that ecosystem should be asking itself, given the fact that fossil fuels in terms of motor vehicles, combustion engines are becoming history. Where are our people going to be? Are we still going to have Roslyn or not, and begin to plan today? On the issue of industry not putting more in R&D, that is true, that government spends more money in R&D perhaps than what industry does at the moment. And for me, it's a question of the kind of policies that we're also driving within the country. It's not enough. We need to put more. It's not just about money. It's about how we manage those funds that we put on R&D. But let's look at the policies that we're also putting in place as a country. And don't get me wrong, I'm a proponent of transformation, and I'm also a beneficiary of transformation. If for the past 2 decades, we have emphasized changing the color of businesses that we have in our country to make it more representative of our society, which is a good and noble goal, and we de-emphasize innovation, what then happens is that you have a system of where we've managed to transform the economy in terms of how it looks like and feels and smells, but we have not managed to put money on innovation. So the incentives that we put to business and other industries is more to do with transformation without looking at innovation as an issue that we must look at. And I worry that in the next 2 or 3 decades, having transformed our economy, whether we'll be able to export, because we're not looking at the innovation aspect of it, both in industry as well as in the public sector.
Sure. You pose a difficult question. Innovation and transformation, do they live together? Are they enemies? Anita, let me come to you. You're now in the private sector, but you perhaps understand from a government side some of the challenges that it faces. I want your thoughts also on this whole creation of this national superstructure for innovation. And let's be clear, we're talking about a structure, superstructure for Industry 4.0 innovation. That's what we're talking about here. Do we need such an animal? And from your side, as a private sector, would you contribute to something like that?
Thank you, Godfrey. For me, what I want to also bring a different angle to it. Yes, superstructure definitely is important to get the authority and from also the support from leadership. But I also want us to just think about how many structures we currently have for so many strategic initiatives within government. There are so many strategies that is more or less 10 plus years that government just struggle to implement. And for me, where I want to go to this is that yes, structures, strategies are really important, policies and procedures, but I think government forget the value of the government employees, to really focus on the people, to bring the people that must make these strategies work along with us. And if I can just mention a few ones of really practical, because I want us to feel that we understand really the challenges that people are feeling on the ground within government. I mean, there's a number of vacancies currently in the ICT space in government. You all will know about the funded and unfunded positions. You are really hampered to fill your positions of these people that need to make work the ecosystem, the strategies, and the structures that needs to be in place. We also need to look at a new skill set to support the digitalization and the innovation that we want to see in government and in South Africa. We also need to look at the workplace, because that will totally change with the digitalization. And with that then comes the accountability and the responsibility that needs to be supported by a very strong performance management system. For me also, we need to make government an attractive employer in this country, because we need good skills within government to have an impact on each and every citizen within South Africa. And then with that is to retain the skills, highly skilled skills that is currently available in government, but we struggle to retain them, to support us to get to this innovative and digitalization government. And I think the last one is just the structures. We really need to look at the structures within each and every department or entity within government. When you look specifically at IT, there's different reporting lines. Some of them are reporting to DGs, others to DDGs, some to HR, some to operations, some to CFOs. And for me, the most important part why I mention this is because IT need to be positioned on a strategic level within the executive authority to get a change on the ground and the support to make South Africa a digitalization country.
Can I respond to something, if you don't mind, sir?
Please do.
Whilst I acknowledge that there are vacancies in government that we need to fill, and I'm not questioning that, I get concerned about increasing the number of inputs as a way of solving the economy. Yes, you can grow economy by increasing the number of inputs, but innovation by definition is how you use your current inputs, your limited resources that you have, to create new ways of doing things. And part of thinking about government is how do we use existing resources without increasing them by thinking of new ways of doing so. That's what innovation is all about.
You will see we have just been joined by another panelist here. He is an innovator. He is actually, maybe let me change that and say he's a pioneer, because he is starting out some kind of Silicon Valley in Ghana, and I'm going to ask him for his opening thoughts very shortly. I want to pick up the thread of the conversation we're having, Sanjeev, with you, and ask the difficult question, I think, that in part I see the audience has been responding to, and there's some very interesting answers. Can you innovate and transform? And I think we couldn't ask a better institution than yourselves. But at the same time, I also want your thoughts on that super national structure that coordinates everybody's efforts around innovation, around Industry 4.0.
I think the short answer is yes to your question, Godfrey. I just wanted to supplement what Teddy and I suppose what Anita have highlighted now with some stats as well. You know, I get a lot of questions around whether South Africans are entrepreneurial, are we innovative? And I'll give you some stats and I'll probably just ask the audience to decide for themselves. But what we see from an industrial perspective across the industry, we have something like 100,000 new business accounts being opened on a monthly basis. So across all of the financial institutions. So that wraps up to around in excess of 1.2 million new businesses being started on a yearly basis in South Africa. And the majority of those businesses, by far, 65%, are transformed businesses. A lot of those are township-type businesses, so township entrepreneurs and economies that they're trying to harness into. The problem we have, though, with significant numbers is that the rate of failure is incredibly high. So if you think of 1.2 million businesses out there, and if each of those businesses were successful and they could employ an average, let's say, 2 to 5 people, you'd solve for the unemployment issue almost within the first year, maybe 2 years if you're really successful with the business. But the problem is that you have significant attrition and problems with businesses such that 40% of new businesses started would probably fail within that first year. And that's why, you know, I think I started the answer with saying that you almost need to reference what Teddy and Anita are saying, because this is a significant disconnect, that we are very entrepreneurial, South Africans are very innovative, but when you speak to entrepreneurs, firstly, anecdotally, and then secondly, from what the studies are saying, the three key disconnects are the fact that they don't have access to funding, and funding is difficult really because you're taking a chance on an entrepreneur. The latter two, the next two, are probably easier to solve for because they need access to the right networks, and then they need access to mentors. So I've met Teddy this morning, I spoke to Kudisile Pitja yesterday. You have very, very successful entrepreneurs and CEOs of companies. How do we create, I think what you've been calling, Godfrey, the superstructure or a platform to try and, I suppose, tie up these ends such that very successful CEOs are now in a position to mentor some of these startup entrepreneurs. They've been through this growth curve. They know the difficulties of starting your business. How is it that we're so porous that we have these million businesses starting and these entrepreneurs don't have access to the right types of mentorship? So I think mentorship and probably access to the right networks are absolutely critical. You know, something else that we see from an F&B perspective is we get a lot of requests from large companies, particularly around enterprise and supply development. So you'd have a mine in Rustenburg, as an example, say to us, we're looking for a black female-owned stationery supplier in Rustenburg. And they have no idea how to gain access to somebody like that. And the 2 points around the access is, firstly, that person needs to be competent. So this business needs to be competent. So there must be some form of rating around it. And secondly, they must be able to scale to supply a large mining company. So when you speak of the superstructure or this platform, it resonates with me. I don't know how you do it, but intuitively for me, you know, the second disconnect is also around unemployment. So here's Anita saying that there's such significant skill sets required around development, and I can attest to that as well. We've been looking for Java developers for the longest time ever. You know, you enter an interview, and if somebody says on their CV that they have Java, you test them in a 5-minute impromptu what a JavaScript would look like, and you employ. And yet we have all of these youth who are unemployed and who are probably very, very able to become taught in these skill sets. So I don't know how the superstructure would work. I don't know how that ecosystem elements would play out. But you know, intuitively for me, this is exactly what we need. And the three would be around, I think, funding. There's probably peer-to-peer funding, maybe even financial services funding. The mentorship, getting successful entrepreneurs, successful CEOs in touch with people who are beginning or embarking on that journey. And then secondly, just the networking ability. So you've come up with something good. You've come up with something innovative. Nobody knows about it. Tommy's spoken about something that's probably been launched with significant marketing effort and budget, and the majority of the audience doesn't know about it. Think of a township entrepreneur sitting on a very good innovation that he's not able to market or access networks into.
Sure. Thank you, Sanjeev. Professor Lung, I'm going to be slightly naughty with you, and I'm going to ask you a trick question. Can you manage innovation?
Well, managing innovation, the thing is, how do you quantify innovation? How do you measure it? Because the question is, if you're going to manage it, you know, most people see it as, well, we need to be able to measure something.
And put controls.
Yeah, of that regard. So what we can do is we can, as Sanjeev has mentioned, that, you know, if there are mentors who have been there, who've done that, and they are in place, and they can actually guide these new entrepreneurs coming in and say, okay, what you're doing looks right, or no, this is a terrible idea. I think there's also a need for access to information. So one thing that I do get every year is I get new postgraduate students who come to me, and they think they're coming up with this most brilliant, innovative idea. And I say, have you actually read on this? Because they might call it one thing, and it actually, there's already been 20, 30 papers written on this topic, but under a different name. So I think the need for mentorship and the need to access to information is very important in ensuring that there is some way in which we don't really have to manage innovation, but rather foster that innovation from people.
In other words, create the environment for it. Let me introduce Dr. Thomas Mensah. He's Chairman and CEO of Lightwave SkyMax. As you saw, I was given a brief document. Now it has disappeared, but I have him here, and there can be no better opportunity than to ask him to talk about the national efforts in Ghana in creating what we're discussing here today, a platform and a system that enables innovation.
Well, as you just mentioned, I've just launched the Silicon Valley of Ghana at the Kofi Annan Center. I intend to help the premier who invited me here to launch Silicon Valley of South Africa. This hopefully will address the questions that has been raised when you're talking about superstructure. If you go to siliconvalleygh.com, you see it. Basically, we've picked about 5 or 6 areas that are critical that needs innovation in the country, that address specific needs of the country. For example, cybersecurity is one. We have an area that will focus on manufacturing drones, as an example. We have an area that look at telemedicine, whereby physicians from Ghana, hospitals can, in real time, look at, let's say, very important cases with the top medical institutions like Mayo Clinic and Johns Hopkins, UK, and even Germany. So you can have 4 doctors looking at a very serious case at the same time, the NMRs, the whole, but that's based on the fact that you need 4G LTE broadband capability in order to allow that telemedicine, to work very well. So these areas have been identified within the Silicon Valley. And of course, I'm the guy that's pushing Ghana to develop bullet train, a high-speed train, that will go from the south to the north in 1.5 hours instead of 10 hours. And so, in my mind, by the way, I'm one of the inventors of fiber optics. In other words, everything you guys do on social media is based on fiber optics. I'm one of the co-inventors of that. So I've seen it all. And the fact that we are looking at this Silicon Valley model means that we can have in a model business accelerators and incorporate within them an area where we can have mentors. In Silicon Valley, you have, when Facebook went in, we know a few people put in money, but those guys that invested were the mentors. Were the mentors. And you can look Twitter with Jack Dorsey and the people that invested were his mentors. You could have Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, the same thing. And so that's what we'll be doing in the Silicon Valley of South Africa and also in the Silicon Valley of Ghana.
Now, sorry, can I just intervene?
Go ahead.
Who are the main partners in that Silicon Valley project in Ghana?
In Ghana, what I've done is to hook the group in Ghana with Silicon Valley in the United States. In other words, they will have access to some of the key players in Silicon Valley there who want to invest. Africa now is the next place where investment is going to flow, so far as technology, innovation. Because when I look at cell phones, it's saturated in America, 99%. The penetration in Africa is basically between 4 and 10%. That's very low. That means we can have a higher penetration rate in terms of the internet platform in Africa than we can have in Ghana or even China.
No, but what you're saying is that the project that you have launched is a private sector initiative. Do you have government money in there? Do you have donor support in there?
That's a good question. That's a good question. If you see the board of directors, and I'll do the same thing here if I've studied a little bit. I'm the chairman and founder, and I have Victor Lawrence, who is a great guy in the innovation space. I have one guy from NASA. But then I have all the vice chancellors of the 4 universities. But most important, I have some of about 4 ministers involved because of the budget issue. Because the ministers approved budget. What I found in Ghana, that they weren't putting money into technology. So with the Silicon Valley, so I have a minister of, let's say, communication there. She's supposed to make sure that money flows from parliament or whatever into that Silicon Valley. That's one. Before I bring my folks from, from the US, whether it's Microsoft, Apple. I want to see, take Britain. Britain invests like serious money, almost $1 billion in innovation. That's Britain. US does the same thing. But in Africa, I don't see the same investment. So we try to change that picture. Educate people, you need to put money here.
Yeah.
you know, especially when you develop products, you need to put money there in any area. You know, one area that I'll be talking in my speech later is called nanotechnology.
Yeah.
If you want to build a nanotechnology plant, and you want to be a leader in that, you got to put money in it. Britain put big money in it. So that's why, and I was being said, why you got these politicians on the board of this?
Yeah.
You know, I said, we need the money. That's why, you know, because if they're on the board, they will make sure that money comes in.
Tell me, do we have enough role models? And does our education system, sorry, I want to add this question, does our education system support innovation, enable innovation?
Well, thanks, Godfrey. I think to answer your question, education and skills are the lifeblood of any innovation system. I don't think we're there yet where we can say our education system fully supports the innovation system. If you were to look, for example, last year, there were 800,000 learners that sat for the National Senior Certificate. Out of those, 245,000 took maths, sat for mathematics, and only about 6,000 got more than 80%. You look at physics, you had more than 179,000 that sat for physical science, and out of that, you only had about 16,000 that got more than 70. Now, the requirement for engineering studies at any university is just above 70, 80% of that. So that's an area that we really need to pay attention to in terms of ensuring that we spare learners, we attract learners to pursue subjects in these particular fields. But I think we as the Department of Science and Technology have a number of initiatives to increase awareness and uptake of these subjects in particular. Amongst them, we have an annual event called National Science Week, which is held by the department and also launched by provinces in all the provinces. But in addition to that, we also have science centers, more than one in each and every province, where learners and role models are able to hold public lectures and also try and educate young people about careers in science, education, and engineering, including what Professor was referring to as STEM. But also we have the South African Agency for the Advancement of Science, or in short known as SASTA, that's supposed to be driving awareness with regards to science and mathematics and engineering. But in addition, there's work that we need to do, not only as the Department of Science and Technology, but also our entities that report to the department, including with discussing innovation. It should not be me sitting here, it should be the Technology Innovation Agency, because its mandate is to support innovations, but also to find these talents that are across the country. And then you've got institutions such as the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, the CSIR, you've got the South African National Space Agency. All of those institutions, they do outreach activities where they're promoting science, technology, and innovation out there.
Sure. Teddy, where do we go from here?
For starters, I don't think incentives is the way to go. We don't have that kind of money. Government has got lots of challenges that it has to do. We need leadership, and we need to begin to think differently.
Did you forget to add political leadership?
Any kind of leadership, including industry leadership.
Okay.
Because in industry, the objective, controversial as it may be, is about profit maximization. But in a state-owned enterprise, all these enterprises have another objective apart from profits, which is the developmental goal. And that does not need money for technology to come out of the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, or from AMSCO, or from Denel, and I can list Transnet to them to open them up for these innovations to go out. There's no need for an incentive. The question for me is, if you're going to put an incentive, on which part of the value chain of innovation? On discovery? On commercialization? We already have enough. We need to change the leadership in our SOEs in terms of the thinking of what the objective of the SOE is about. It's about development. Otherwise, the government will leave it to business to do it.
Sure.
We need to think differently in terms of our research institutions. Our leaders in government need to think differently about what innovation is about. And industry has to think differently. We cannot, as industry, put more of our money in importing goods and services out of South Africa at the expense of developing our own when we can. What is the point of saving 5 cents or 10 rands because it's cheaper to buy from China, when if you invest that 10 cents and you allow a slightly expensive price, just allow it, pay a little bit more, and develop capacity. So industry has a lot to do in making sure that we put money behind innovation.
Anita?
From our side, yesterday also in one of the sessions, they said, what must we go and do different tomorrow? So for me, I would like to mention 4 steps, very practical, what I believe that each of us in this room and attending this conference can go and do different. I agree with Teddy about the leadership, ethical leadership. They also mentioned it yesterday. But I want to break it down and say ethical behavior of each and every citizen of South Africa. We have to start acting with integrity. What that means is to do the right things, even when no one is watching. And with ethical behavior as a person, we will get ethical behavior as employees, we will get ethical behaviors as managers, and at the end, ethical behaviors as leaders. The second point for me is to focus on our people. And there for me is to go back and really care and grow the people that we need to become a digital future. We have to start at school level with this building skills. And then the third one is data. Is really to go back to your institutions and government and go and make sure and see what data do you have. You will be surprised how little of us know exactly the value that we have in our data. Basically to go back and do a data inventory register. Then you assess your data to see, is your quality, what is your quality? Is it complete, your data? Is it accurate? And is it valid? And if your answer is no, is to go back to your systems and applications, because those controls need to be built in there from a start that support your business processes. And then to identify your key data sets, because that will then at the end form part of the ecosystem that we want to start putting together and work effectively for us as a country. For me, because the data is so important, because no one can hide behind the story that data is telling. And then lastly, for the private sector, I feel very strong that we all need to go back and really understand government processes. Because if I talk processes, it's really government strategies. There's so many strategies that is well written. The annual performance plans, because at the end, the annual performance plans ensure that government deliver services to our citizens. But us as private sector, to really understand it and the solutions that we deliver or we support government with, that we really have impact to improve service delivery and not only focus on the bottom line. And then lastly, is that we as private sector needs to also support government to have better outcomes. And I'm talking about audit outcomes, and that we support and not contribute to bad outcomes, especially in supply chain management, conflict of interest, irregular expenditure, and fruitless and wasteful expenditure. And I feel we as private sector can really contribute a lot to government if we all are behaving as citizens of South Africa with ethical behavior.
Sure, thank you. Sanjeev?
Well, I think part of working for a bank means that you have to wear a pinstripe suit, and then the second point is around operational excellence. So I think we each, and I'd like to challenge everybody in the audience here, is to how do we make this more practical? And, you know, we spoke about incentives, and there is no better incentive than financial gain, right? And probably the best practical example I can think of is, and I'm not even sure what you call these guys, but these guys that do first or even second level recycling for all of us on a weekly basis. They come by, they have their trolleys, they sift through our garbage, and they try to clean that up. So I spoke to one of these individuals a while back, and on a good day, he could probably make 250 rand, but hopelessly inefficient. He'd probably take an hour and a half to sift through all of the bins just on the street that I live on. He has a trolley that doesn't work very well, so he tries to push it, and all of us get annoyed when we see them trying to cross intersections with these trolleys. So something very, very practical, something very simple is, how do you take ownership of a problem such as this? So again, here's a good example of where a business case has coalesced because this guy is making money. That's practical for him. He's making 200 Rand on average per day. It's an important function for each of us because we all know we're choking the planet, right? We're polluting our oceans, we're killing the environment, and yet we want to do something, but even at first level recycling. So my commitment just to this guy, I said to him, is okay, I'll help you with the safety gear, because here he is rummaging through my bin, bare hands, doesn't even have a face mask. And then what I've said to my family at home as well is, can we not at least try to separate this? So separate glass, separate plastics, whatever. So at a household level, you're trying to help efficiency. But here's a very, very clear example of a problem that needs solving. All of us know it's a problem. How do we solve for it? So I don't know how you set up your superstructures. I don't know how the platforms would work, but I'd like to challenge each of us in our day-to-day world, in our day-to-day capacities, how do we start solving for this? There was a while back when I think there was a catchphrase around each one employ one, each one teach one. In our personal capacities, I mean, we have people who clean our houses, we have people that tend to our gardens. You've already employed 2 people. I'd like to see somebody add to that. The third employment level would be a project like this that you can adopt in your personal capacity. I think if it starts there at grassroots level, you can slowly get that up the waterfall.
Okay, Professor Lu?
So yesterday, I noticed on the one Slido comment, like, why are you here? And a percentage of people said, my boss made me. And I think that's actually very good, because it means that your employers are making the effort to try and upskill you, enhance your knowledge, and prepare you for our Industrial Revolution 4.0. But it can't just stop there. So what I experience normally, and my colleagues experience as well, is that we've got companies that say, yes, we want our staff members to be better in terms of their knowledge and so on. But then that's one thing. They say, please go and register for postgraduate studies. But on the other hand, they give them absolutely no support in terms of time. So when they're supposed to be doing homework or research assignments, they don't have the time because they get sent all over the show. Because at the end of the day, yes, I do agree, the company needs to make money. They do employ that employee, but they need to take into consideration long-term. They need that person to graduate with those skills so they can make more money in the long term.
Sure. Dr. Mensah, from your perspective, key lessons for us in terms of building a roadmap to ensuring that we are competitive in Industry 4.0. Do we go the Silicon Valley way? Do we institutionalize it?
Yeah, the Silicon Valley to me is very, very important, because you can address all the issues that were raised, finding a mentor, and getting mentors can be from industry or from academia and all that. So the Silicon Valley is very, very important. But that's one piece. And I hope there's going to be a document coming out of here that will have recommendations.
Yes.
Specific recommendations, whether leadership, government, industry, whatever. But the reason why I'll be going to your innovation hub, the reason why I'm pushing this concept of Silicon Valley local, that is Silicon Valley of Joburg or Silicon Valley of South Africa. They'll have some elements of Silicon Valley in the U.S., but it's localized.
Right.
Yeah.
Or Savannah, like in the...
Exactly. And then we can have maybe outside people like me being on the advisory, helping. And in my case, I would be specifying certain specific industries here. You know, you mentioned this recycling idea. The concept of waste to energy is very important. On a large scale, why can't you take all the garbage, sort it up? You know, even the tires in the cars can be chopped up, frozen, and magnets will remove all the metal out of it, and it will, on a moving belt, it will sort all the elements you talked about. Now, at the end of the day, when you finish it, why don't you put it in let's say a fluidized bed, and then heat it up and let the energy that comes off that be used to drive turbines, and then the biomass used for fuel and other stuff. So you can do all those things. But having the Silicon Valley will be where the brain power is, just like Silicon Valley in California. But then it will look at issues in South Africa.
Right.
What's more important to us, or issues in Ghana.
Sure. Thank you, sir. Tommy, I haven't forgotten you. The roadmap from your perspective.
I think for me it's really 5 things. The first one, of course, is the one that I alluded to earlier on, increased investment in science, technology, and innovation. That's something that the government needs to seriously consider. The second one, of course, is to improve our education outcomes. As I indicated earlier on, that education and skills are the lifeblood of any innovation system. The third one is really key. It's partnership and policy coherence, which are fundamental to any innovation system. And of course, as I said, innovation is everybody's business. We need a whole of society approach to innovation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And at that point, I'd like to ask, please, to give a huge vote of thanks to our panelists for up-hopping, innovative thoughts that will enable us to become sharper. And I think, as they are saying, the revolution begins right at the beginning. A hand of applause, please, for our panelists.